So this is the 30 Years' War, one of the really hideously climactic events in European history. You know, on your list of the worst things that have ever happened to modern Europe, you know, you got your Black Death, you got your First World War, you got your Second World War, you've got the Eurovision Song Contest, and the 30 Years' War. And which of those you see as the worst kind of depends on your standards. But this is going to be a pretty straightforward chronological lecture with too much text and not enough visuals, but I'm doing this really just to give you an overview of the events and the personalities and kind of a framework for you to hang a more nuanced analysis off of. Okay, so we start with the map, and there's a lot of maps in this in this lecture. This is the map that we're going to keep coming back to. This is Europe in the first half of the 17th century. And this is where the 30 Years' War is going to be fought, almost exclusively within the boundaries of the Holy Roman Empire. And you can see that it's going to drag in almost all of the players on the European continent. We're going to have Austria and Spain and Prussia and the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, Sweden, France. The English get dragged in, the Dutch get dragged in. It's going to be a really encompassing major general war between the continent's powers. Okay, so here are some key characteristics to bear in mind about the 30 Years' War. First of all, the Holy Roman Empire is the battleground. A few incidents happen outside the borders of the empire, but for the most part, this is an imperial war, which is very, very much to the detriment and tragedy of Germany. In the beginning of the war, so in 1618 and the 1620s, it is in many ways a religious war. It begins as Protestants versus Catholics in Germany. By the end of the war, well, we're into the 1630s and 1640s, it really isn't religious anymore. It is a war against Habsburg power. A conflict which begins as a religious dispute ends up as a political dispute as the attempts by the Habsburgs to centralize their authority and to dominate the Holy Roman Empire are going to be opposed by other powers on the continent, powers which in many cases are Catholic. You'll have Catholics fighting against Catholics in the interest of Protestants, which is part of the complexity and some would say tragedy of the war. The war is resolved by the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, Treaty of Westphalia, end of the 30 Years' War. That's one of your dates list kind of bell ringers. The Treaty of Westphalia marks a real sort of transitional date in European history, and we'll talk about why that is at the end. All right, so for convenience sake, the war is divided up into phases. This is one of those things where people have made it up after the fact. Nobody at the time said, oh, we're in the Bohemian Phase of the 30 Years' War, for obvious chronological reasons. But looking back, we find it useful to divide the war into these different phases. And the first one, which will take us for the 4 years from 1618 to 1622, is the Bohemian Phase. Ferdinand II, who is a Habsburg, he is the heir to the Habsburg dominions in the empire and is in line to be the next Holy Roman Emperor. He inherits the province of Bohemia. which is where the Czech Republic is today. He inherits Bohemia, and like all Habsburgs before him, and since he is a Catholic, the Bohemians hate him. The Bohemians look at him as an alien outsider with an alien religion. The Bohemians tend to be Lutherans. They are proud of their Czech identity. They see the Habsburgs coming in and sort of trying to bully them, and they resent the idea that their state is falling into the hands of this Catholic power. Ferdinand is a fairly devout Catholic, and he is also reading from the Habsburg playbook of using religion to impose central authority. He will not tolerate the Protestants in Bohemia. And the Protestants are very concerned about what is going to happen. And this leads to one of the great moments and stories in European history, the defenestration of Prague in May 1618. The leader, the elite, the ruling body in the Bohemian city of Prague, the Protestant rulers, were meeting in the top of the central tower in Prague. And these two messengers from Ferdinand come into their meeting and are going to try and throw their weight around, so to speak. The Protestants take offense at this and decide to throw the messengers around. Literally, these two guys are picked up and thrown out the windows of the tower, which leads to one of the all-time great vocabulary words, defenestration. Defenestration means to throw out a window. You really must find a way to use defenestration in your next English essay. So these two Catholic messengers are defenestrated out the window and down to the ground. Miraculously, they both survive. It's a rather long drop. It's more than 30 or 40 feet. And yet they both of these guys live. They pick themselves up at the bottom of the tower, they scrape themselves off, and they run away. How they survive this is very much a question of your particular predilections. If you are a Catholic, you believe that they survived because as they were thrown out the window, angels grabbed them and lowered them gently to the earth to protect them from the heretic. If you're a Protestant, they survived because at the bottom of the tower was a large pile of human filth and excrement that they landed in, breaking their fall, and so they limped away covered in poo. Regardless, when you defenestrate the ruler's guys, it's on. And so Bohemia rises up in rebellion. They name a new king, Frederick II. I'm sorry, Frederick II and Ferdinand II sound similar. You'll just have to get used to it. Frederick II is a Protestant prince within the empire. He's the prince of the Palatinate, which is another imperial province slightly to the west. So Frederick II, when his wife moved from the Palatinate into Bohemia, where they are crowned king and queen of Bohemia in open defiance of Ferdinand and his Catholic power. And so it is on. Ferdinand now becomes the Holy Roman Emperor. His father dies, and Ferdinand is elected as the emperor, and he begins to turn his attention to crushing these annoying Bohemian rebels. Frederick, who frankly does not have a whole lot of money, borrows an army from Bavaria, and the two of them are going to fight it out. And at a famous battle called White Mountain, the imperial army of Ferdinand defeats the Protestant army of Frederick, and Frederick loses Bohemia. He and his wife are driven out in flight from the defeat. They leave Bohemia, never to return, and Ferdinand has asserted his authority. He has slapped down the Protestant rebels. He imposes a Catholic orthodoxy in Bohemia, and that should be that. The issue which starts the 30 Years' War is resolved, and it seems like one more step on the attempts of the emperors to centralize their authority. So the story's over, except it's not. The rebellion in Bohemia inspires other Protestants in the empire, partly those who are seeking their own independence, partly those who are afraid of what will happen if Ferdinand gets away with this. And so we have a series of sort of brush fire Protestant Catholic clashes in the empire, for the most part in the southern part of the empire, as Protestant forces attempt to maintain some independence, attempt to assert themselves, and as Ferdinand uses his power and clout to crush them down. Although Ferdinand is in a sense successful, he is not able to really break Protestant resistance. Snuff it out here and there, but never to eradicate it. And this is going to be a problem. People begin to perceive these clashes in the empire now in a very religious sense, that this is really a great struggle between the forces of Catholicism, the Catholic Reformation in its military form, against Protestantism, an embattled religion. Protestantism, after having had its great expansion, is now feeling restricted and rolled back and oppressed. And so this becomes a religious conflict in the eyes of many of its participants. This then leads to the next phase, the Danish Phase. Ferdinand is trying to end all resistance. He's going to try and crush the Protestants, not just in the southern part of the empire, but in the northern part of the empire as well. And Ferdinand turns to one of the most remarkable of all European generals, a guy named Albrecht von Wallenstein. Wallenstein is probably legitimately a military genius, one of the great generals of the 17th century. More on Wallenstein in a bit, but the important thing for now is that Wallenstein takes control of the imperial army. He marches the army up to the north, and he fights the Danes. The Danish king, whose name is perhaps coincidentally Christian, is a Protestant, and he is going to try and gain power and status by defending his fellow Protestant brethren in the empire. He takes his Danish army into the northern part of the empire to fight it out, and he gets thoroughly defeated by Wallenstein. So by the time we get to the late 1620s, 1629, things are looking actually pretty good for Ferdinand and the empire. He's won most of the important battles. He has the best general. The Danes tried to stick their nose in his business and were driven back bloodily. And so Ferdinand, feeling very good about himself, decides it's time to rub it in, time to take some victory. And so he issues the Edict of Restitution in 1629. The Edict of Restitution basically says that all Catholic lands that have been lost in the empire since 1552 go back to the Catholics. So any monasteries, any churches, any schools, estates, whatever it is, if it was Catholic and it was taken away, it has to go back to its original owner. And, we're talking decades and decades of property transfer here. A couple of generations in some case, people who have been living on these lands, all of a sudden, nope, goes back to the church. All Protestants are deprived of their religious and political rights within the empire, except Lutherans. Lutherans are still allowed to hang on. The empire still has Lutherans, and some of these Lutherans are big shots. Some of these Lutherans are electors and powerful men. So Ferdinand can't just get rid of Protestantism, but he can try and cut it way back. And so he says, Lutherans, you can keep on going, but these newfangled Calvinists and Anabaptists and anybody else, no political rights, no religious rights. You are not part of our community. This is, in some sense, another example of centralizing authority in the hands of the emperor. You can make a good argument, however, that he overreaches himself. That Ferdinand, the more he wins, the more powerful he looks, the worse it is for him, because the German princes and nobles of the empire fear him more and more. They understand what is happening here. Remember, the Reformation was in some part, maybe in large part, about resisting the centralizing power of Habsburg emperors. They haven't stopped. The Habsburgs haven't stopped trying to centralize. The German princes have not stopped trying to resist that. So they see Ferdinand's success as a threat. They protest. They mutter about resistance. And so in an attempt to try and calm them down, Ferdinand fires Wallenstein. Now, why does he fire Wallenstein? Well, again, partly it's a fairly straightforward calculation. Wallenstein is the empire's best general. He's had tremendous success. So he is the weapon that the emperor can use to threaten rebellious German sovereigns. Wallenstein is also a strange dude. He was deeply, deeply involved in astrology and alchemy and some beliefs that were considered sort of out there. He handled himself in a very sort of arrogant way. He was a notorious hypochondriac, and there was a widespread belief that what he really wanted to do was not so much serve the emperor as set himself up as a king of his own dominion, that he was going to use the army to carve out his own country. Those fears are not unreasonable, actually. Wallenstein probably did want to do those things. So firing Wallenstein was a way of placating the German nobles. So exit Wallenstein. This is what the Danish Phase looks like in some highly complicated and yet still simplified version. What you see there in the sort of southeast is the start of Wallenstein, and you can see how he marched first down through the southern parts of the empire, even up to Hungary to defeat rebels, then north up through into the northern parts of Germany, and even into Denmark, as he just lays waste to all of the opponents of the emperor. So this is the Danish Phase, and this again is a place where you might expect the war to stop, leaving aside the weirdness with Wallenstein and the nervousness of the German nobles. It seems like the emperor has gotten what he wants. He has defeated the challengers. He's got the best army in the field. He's shattered the attempts of the international Protestant community to interfere. So this is looking like a win. It isn't. And it isn't because the rest of Europe can't keep their noses out of the emperor's business. And so this leads us to the third phase of the conflict, the Swedish Phase. And the two dominant figures of the Swedish Phase are these two men, Cardinal Richelieu of France and King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. Unlikely allies in that Richelieu is a cardinal. He is a French Catholic and a devout one. He is a cardinal who takes his religious duties quite seriously, but he is also the first minister of France. He is the man who advises King Louis XIII and who plans France's long-term policy and does it very, very well. Richelieu understands that if the Habsburgs are able to centralize their power in Germany, then that France will be surrounded by Habsburg power, that the Habsburgs will control Spain and that the great Spanish Empire and wealth, the Habsburgs will control Germany and all of the central authority there, and that France will be caught between two implacable enemies and doomed. Richelieu determines that he will stop the centralization of the empire in Germany at all costs. And one of the costs that he is quite willing to pay is to ally with Protestants, in particular this Protestant, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden. He is going to pick up the mantle of the Protestant champion after King Christian of Denmark was so ignominiously defeated. Gustavus decides he's going to take a crack at it. He's a much, much more capable general and leader than King Christian was. Gustavus is interested in getting involved in the mess that is going on in Germany, and Richelieu encourages him, not just with kind words or happy thoughts, but with money. French money flows up to Sweden, where Adolphus uses it to build himself a first-rate army, and so the Swedish phase begins with France and Sweden getting involved to cause trouble for the Habsburgs in Germany. They have a common interest. They both want to stop Habsburg power. They both see a threat in the Habsburgs. Gustavus sees it partly for religious reasons. Richelieu sees it purely for political reasons. Sweden will be the point of the spear. Sweden will lead the charge and do the fighting. France will provide the monetary and logistical support for Gustavus. So Gustavus invades the Holy Roman Empire and begins laying waste. He is an extremely talented general. The Swedish army, paid for by French money, is very effective. And many of the victories that the emperor had won over the course of this war now begin to get undone as Adolphus begins winning territory back for the Protestant cause. Ferdinand panics. He brings back Wallenstein. Wallenstein is initially successful. And so this sets up the great conflict between Gustavus and Wallenstein. It's like Optimus Prime versus Megatron or something. These are the two real heavyweights. And they come together in battle at a place called Lutzen. At the Battle of Lutzen, Wallenstein and his army are driven back. The Swedes win, sort of, but during the course of the battle, Adolphus is killed. No one knows exactly how. And with his death, the Swedish power is dramatically reduced. It's worth pointing out here that Gustavus had become more and more independent of France. He had been less and less likely to take Richelieu's orders. And it looked like he was going to put himself in a position to centralize his own power in Central Europe and perhaps be an even bigger problem for Richelieu than the Holy Roman Empire might be. Fortunately, in air quotes for Richelieu, Adolphus dies this mysterious death. Richelieu's enemies had a habit of dying like this, and there were people who speculated that Adolphus had actually been assassinated by agents of Richelieu. There isn't any evidence for that. It's just the sort of mystique and reputation that Richelieu had, that people would attribute things that were really just good luck to his brilliance and his trickiness. So the result here is that the Swedish advance is stopped, and Wallenstein is still in command of a very effective army in the field. but the German princes are still afraid of Ferdinand's power, and they're afraid of Wallenstein. Wallenstein seems more and more to be acting as an independent player. He begins negotiating with the French and the Swedes and the Protestants. He's playing some very complicated game. He may be angling for his own kingdom. He says that he's considering doing a deal to impose a just peace in the interest of Germany, in contrast to the interest of the empire or the emperor. So it's not at all clear what Wallenstein actually wanted, if he had a clear plan, but he succeeds in making everybody nervous. And so the emperor gives approval for Wallenstein to be removed. And Wallenstein is then assassinated by a bunch of Scottish and Irish mercenaries who track him down in a chateau, and he's butchered as he gets in his bedroom by a halberd, which is kind of like a giant axe on a pole. So Wallenstein the Great is dead. The two great generals of the war are now dead, and so ends the Swedish phase of the war. You can see here in the northern part, the orange, where Gustavus comes down, succeeds in taking a great deal of territory down in through Saxony. You can see where Wallenstein comes and they have their battles, and so the war, this part of the war ends with power still balanced inside the empire. And so we come to our final phase, the last awful 13 years of the war, the French phase. And what you can see here on the map of the French phase is that the armies of France are now going to become directly involved in this combat. Whereas before France was encouraging and propelling the strings and paying the bills, now Richelieu realizes that France is going to have to really get into the game. With the death of Adolphus, if France does not intervene, Richelieu judges that Ferdinand will be able to centralize power. He can't allow that, and so he takes France to war in Germany. And this is really the part of the story where it becomes obvious that this war is not really about religion anymore. We have a Catholic monarch going to war against another Catholic monarch in support of the German Protestants in the empire. That's not about religion anymore. That's about politics. So the French phase lasts for 13 years. France is now the leading combatant, the tip of the spear, and Sweden is much more in a sort of a support role. Almost all of the countries in Europe are now participating, being dragged in directly and indirectly. And this phase is the most destructive, the most awful. What you have to understand is that we've been talking very generally about battles and combat and stuff, is that during the 30 Years' War, the armies that are in the field are armies in the loosest sense of the word. They're not highly disciplined. They're not highly organized. They're not all wearing uniforms. For the most part, they are not really ideological. These are men who tend to be really just one step above bandits. They're thugs who will fight for anybody who will pay them, who will feed them, and who will give them the opportunity to loot. And so when you loose an army into this battle, into this warfare, it's like releasing a horde of locusts, or army ants or something. They're not really controllable. You can't carefully guide what they're doing. You just sort of point them in the direction of the enemy, and you hope that they end up doing more damage to people you don't like than to people that you do. So now as this war drags on and on, Germany is going to suffer. German towns are just horribly, horribly savaged. These armies are, really not supplied at any point, really. The states that exist are not centralized enough. They're not rich enough to, for example, arrange that an army gets all the food it needs. You got, let's say, 15,000 guys marching through central Germany. They need a lot of food. France can't get it to them. There's just even if Richelieu wanted to, and he probably did, it wasn't like he could just snap his fingers and cause all the food that he needed to go there. It was beyond the ability of most of these early modern states to do that kind of stuff. So the army fed itself. There's this old saying, right, that if you have a chicken and I have a gun, I'm not going hungry. The armies reap horrible, horrible havoc on the regular common people of Germany. German agriculture collapses, with the result, predictably, of famine. It isn't just the food that the soldiers steal, which there is a lot. It's also that by scaring away or killing the peasants, stealing and eating the seed corn, burning the farms, doing all that the ability to make food for next year goes away. And so famine results. During the course of the 30 Years' War, approximately 8 million Germans die, which is a third of the population. That's extraordinary. German population is 21 million at the start of the war. It's less than 14 million by 1648. That compares with the great horrific events of European history. That compares with the world wars. That compares with the Black Death. For Germany, this was cataclysmic. There are the consequences of that you would expect. Massive inflation occurs as there are fewer and fewer goods being produced. The prices for those goods increase dramatically. Trade is crippled throughout Europe as the roads become unsafe, and warfare suffocates transportation. It ends up in a miserable economic situation. This map shows impact of the 30 Years' War, and you can see, from this sort of carries through from the maps we've been seeing, right? The maps that have shown where the conflict tended to be in central Germany, and you can see from the red and the purple where they're losing 50% or over 50% of their population in central Germany. This is the apocalypse. This is about as bad as you can possibly imagine, and it drags on and on and on. And the powers that be don't really know how to stop it. The sad truth is that France is sort of willing to let this happen because the hardest things are happening in Germany, not on French soil. And all of this devastation just makes the Habsburgs that much weaker in the long run. Finally, after 30 years of all this, we get the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which is going to bring the war finally to a conclusion. And so it's the Treaty of Westphalia that ends this carnage. The Peace of Westphalia is complicated, and in some ways even contradictory, but to go through the main provisions of this agreement. Politically, it really confirms the failure of the Holy Roman Emperor to centralize. Each German prince is recognized as sovereign and free from any kind of control by the emperor. This is a big win for the German princes and a big win for the French, because this is the end of imperial centralization. The United Provinces, or the Dutch Netherlands, are officially independent. The southern part, the part we would call Belgium today, remained a Spanish possession for a while, but the UP, the United Provinces, the Netherlands, they are now actually independent after many, many decades of revolt and civil war. France gets some territory, the then German-speaking province of Alsace, as in Alsace-Lorraine, as in World War I and World War II. This is the territory that Germany and France are going to kick back and forth between themselves for centuries. Sweden gets something. It gets some land in northern Germany on the Baltic and Black Seas to expand their ambitions, which they're going to end up losing lots of it to the Russians in the Great Northern War. Stay tuned. Switzerland gets to leave the empire totally independent of the Holy Roman Emperor, and this will be the rise of the Swiss Confederation. Sweden gets a voice in the Holy Roman Empire, again, just further weakening Habsburg control, and Brandenburg gets some territory in central Germany. Okay, so that's all the political stuff. Basically, the French and their allies get territory and power at the expense of the emperor and the Habsburgs. There are religious provisions as well, which may or may not be just as important. First, we get that the Calvinists have the same privileges as the Lutherans in the Peace of Augsburg. In other words, when a ruler decides that his province will be Calvinist, then everyone has to be Calvinist, and he is allowed to be that. So Calvinism is recognized as a legitimate, quote-unquote, form of Protestantism within the empire. But this is different. The ruler of each state can determine the official religion, but he must permit freedom of private worship. So this is actually a kind of early religious tolerance. The motivations are not so much about being nice to people. It's more about ways to make sure that the empire stays fragmented and broken up and not centralized. There is an exception to this. The hereditary lands of the Habsburgs, that is the Habsburg family lands, not the imperial lands, but the family lands of the Habsburg, like Austria, those do not have to have religious tolerance. In Habsburg lands, like Austria, you're going to see Catholicism continue to be enforced. And that is going to lead us to the map of Europe at the end of the 17th century. And you're going to see the empire becoming less and less important because the Richelieu's plan of shattering the centralization was successful. And you're going to see the Habsburgs spending more and more of their effort on the Austrian lands and the Austrian Empire. So going forward, we're going to talk less and less about the Holy Roman Empire, more and more talk about the Habsburg Austrian Empire, which is going to be an important player all the way up through the First World War. So stay tuned. The Peace of Westphalia is, in a sense, either a great success or a great failure. Nobody is happy. There's some school of thought that says if there's a negotiation and everybody walks away unhappy, it's been a fair negotiation. That may be true, but so many people feel aggrieved that there is a problem. Many Protestants feel betrayed. They feel like they didn't get enough out of this. The fact that the Habsburgs can still impose religious orthodoxy, the fact that the state religions in many cases are still Catholic. The Protestants are sort of saying, well, why did we fight for so long? Why did we die so much? Shouldn't there be a Protestant orthodoxy, or at least more tolerance for Protestants? The Pope denounces the agreement because of the concessions it makes to the Protestants. The Pope is on the downward slope of his influence, but the fact that the leader of Catholicism rejects it, that matters. Pretty much the only benefit to this treaty is that it ends the fighting. The fighting had become so intolerable, so expensive, so bloody for everybody that nobody could face going on with it. It was just hideous. Because the war is such a mess, and because the treaty is such a mishmash of provisions, over the next few centuries, this war is going to be blamed for pretty much everything that goes wrong in Central Europe. There are many people who will argue that this war is what stopped Germany from unifying in a normal, organic way. Germany stays broken up and divided for centuries, and it isn't until the end of the 19th century that we're going to see Germany really emerge as Germany. And the way Germany emerges in the 1870s is going to have dire consequences. It's going to lead directly to the First World War, which of course leads to the Second World War. And there are many, many people, many Germans and others who would argue that it was the 30 Years' War that started all that, that if Germany had just been allowed to centralize the way France centralized, and Spain and England, that you'd have a much healthier Europe and a much better place. That, of course, is speculation and a conversation for another day. As is this, what are the long-range effects of the 30 Years' War? As to that, I would have to say, stay tuned.